Right, Om Shanti, and welcome to those who are joining with us on Zoom as well as YouTube for Soul Cafe. And so, as usual, it's lovely to start with a little reflection. Within every being in this world, there is a pull for that which is real, for that which is actually invisible. To be able to feel these experiences of peace, love, sense of belonging, sense of realness. None of these feelings are anything you can really measure or see. But we are drawn to these experiences. We're drawn to that which is invisible. Through time, when we forget who we are, we lose access to the power and the experience of who we are. We also start to lose the power to feel the difference between what is real, what is not, what is underneath the surface. To feel who I am requires that I actually begin to discover the real me, to experience that I am a spiritual being existing inside the body. Now, I am a being who cannot be seen, but I can recognize, understand who I am. Understanding and recognition isn't necessarily a physical thing. But to be aware that I am a being of experience. I'm a being of awareness itself. We are always aware of one thing or another. It may not be so apparent, but awareness always exists in day-to-day life. And in fact, I am awareness itself. I am consciousness itself. As consciousness, I'm invisible. And I used to feel that I'm a being of consciousness that is separate from this body. a being whose light can't be seen. But I used to feel that when I was in the body, that there was me, the being me, the soul. And then there is this body, which is temporary. And everything else around me that is also temporary. The body and things around me can be seen, physically tangible. Can be experienced through the 5 physical senses. But then there's me, the being, inside, separate from this body. And I used to feel my own presence as a being who is calm, this gentle stillness, this lightness that is so natural about me. The distinction between me and this body used to feel so clear. And I used to feel my true value so naturally, not defined by things around me, not even defined by the condition of this costume I sit in. Every moment I feel the distinction between me and this body. Every moment I feel the quality of me. I increasingly become more myself. I increasingly become independent of the physical. I increasingly become closer to the experience that I, the soul, am eternal, imperishable, and that everything else around me, including this body, is perishable. And I learned to carry this awareness and experience this feeling of me, one drop at a time, one moment at a time, as I walk while I'm in this body, as I talk while I'm in this body, while I interact and act. No need to close the eyes. As I go back to that original reality, I used to feel myself, even whilst in the physical. To feel that. That is when I am increasingly mastering what used to be mine. The reality that I am a soul in this body, but separate from it. Om Shanti. So today is story time. And of course, the commentaries are always meant to help us to prime our sense of experience or awareness into the story. And so the story that we're going to share is a story that's in one of the Hindu scriptures, but I feel that there's actually always equivalents, out there. And to be honest with you, if anyone has ever heard of Beauty and the Beast, one of my favorite stories, if I could have found that story, I would have read that because that's such a lovely story. But we have very limited amount of time. That probably would take a long time, but they've got beautiful pictures. But so similar. And as you know from the commentary, it's really about the capacity to see what is real, to see what is deep. So this is what the story is about. And so we'll share the story and then we'll actually explore the spiritual significance of it. So King Janak of Videha was a king well known for his knowledge, charity, and sanctity. He lived in a splendid palace, but wished to live the life of a renunciate. He wanted to live in the world, but remain detached from it. So he wanted to maintain this personal integrity, sense of character of himself, whilst being in the world. He made it known that he would listen to anyone in his kingdom who could tell him the method of receiving liberation in life, so free while living, and in Hindi called Jivan Mukti, within a second. All the Brahmins, the Brahmin priests, and scholars from far and wide came to visit him and gave very learned discourses, so lots of lectures and scholarly lectures, but no one was able to fulfill the king's request. He was disappointed and thoughts of giving up the whole idea, for the scholars had not given any concrete solutions to his problem. At the king's palace, the discussions were still in progress, open to all. Having listened to all of the sages and scholars, the king had announced that anyone else who thought that he might have the correct answer to the problem and who could satisfy his thirst for knowledge was welcome to speak. So inviting it now to the broader crowd, not just the sages and the scholars. So he announced that anyone who thought that he might have the correct answer to the problem and who could satisfy his thirst for knowledge was welcome to speak. He then asked Ashtavakra whether he had something to contribute. And this is like an individual of the king's council. Yes, said Ashtavakra, but your majesty, before I reveal to your highness the words of God's wisdom, I must say something about this gathering. I hope that none of you will be angered by my frankness. I must call a spade, so being transparent. The sages looked tense. Some of them grinned. Others were seen grinding their teeth, and others again were gnawing their fingers or nibbling at their nails. In contrast, the king sat calm and composed, listening attentively and patiently. Continuing on, Ashtavakra said, "Forgive me for my rudeness, your royal highness. Royal sages, I respect you all for your learning and wisdom, but may I ask you why you all laughed so scornfully when you saw me entering the courtyard?" So this is an individual actually in the scriptures. He's very deformed, extremely deformed on the physical outside. He, basically does not look very visibly appealing. So may I ask why you all laughed so scornfully when you saw me entering the courtyard? Wasn't it because of my crawling and deformity of my body? I am sure it was my ugly body with its bends and twists that made you mock me. Doesn't this then speak rather eloquently of your body consciousness? They now all appear to be realizing their mistake, but the expressions of scorn had not yet disappeared totally from their faces. The ugly man continued, am I wrong to point out that soul consciousness is the means for spiritual progress and enlightenment? Therefore, if anyone looks at the body without seeing the soul, and instead of feeling sorrow for another's fate, hatefully laughs at his condition, would you call him a sage? No, he looks only at the outer flesh, the skin, and therefore I would have to call him a dealer in skin. At that moment, King Janak decided to mount his horse and leave the court. He had one foot on the stirrup and the other foot on the ground when Ashtavakra asked him, O king, where are you? King Janak replied, on the horse and on the ground, but not fully on either. Ashtavakra said, what you are now saying is Brahma Gyan, the knowledge of Jivan Mukti, so the knowledge of liberation in life, not really here, not really there. The conqueror of attachment will be in the world, but not of the world. While living in the world, a soul will be mentally detached, so not disconnected. That word often has that perception of disconnection, but actually free. It's really what not attached doesn't mean that you can't still engage, but you're not dependent, you're not latching on to things. So while living in the world, a soul will be mentally detached. On hearing this, King Janak achieved enlightenment and became even more respected than the many famous sages around him. So of course there are many versions of the story. I've seen some other ones but basically the essence of the story is two things actually. Interesting listening to the story, because here is this being who has everything, but has this thirst actually to be able to not be affected by everything, even though he has everything. And so there's his journey. And then there's this being, Ashtavakra, where everyone could look at him. And there are other versions of the story where you actually see more of this depth of wisdom that Ashtavakra has, but trying to really imply that you can't actually see, the depth and quality of understanding and wisdom and knowledge that this soul has just because of looking on the outside. And so there is actually two parallels happening, and they're very much connected, and that we seem to just judge things on the outside, on the superficial. But then there's also this thirst that the king is wanting to be able to preserve integrity while in the physical. And the connection between those two is always still the same when it comes to being a soul. The preservation of that value that actually has nothing to do with physicality. To be able to hold that inside, if we put ourselves in the shoes of Ashtavakra, in any sort of context we've had in our past experiences, have I ever felt that? Maybe not to that extreme extent, and maybe some have. But to feel that I still hold such, integrity and self-worth and self-respect, self-regard, regardless of what is happening around me, regardless of using, what we use as perceptions of what is considered to be more valuable compared to one person to another, compared to one position to another, relationship to another, possession to another. So many different layers we know of that. But then also to be able to experience my value that never changes while I'm in these different situations. So it's quite a fascinating story that there is an intersection of the two. And I would really feel that souls are always thirsting for both, that they really don't want to be affected, but not really actually understanding what does that mean to not be affected. Sometimes that's sort of where it stops. And one of the things that we've been addressing in the Meditation 101 myth busting, which we've already had 3 sessions on Wednesdays. Next session will be the last session, which has a lot to do with addressing this aspect of spirituality overall, that spirituality is separate from physicality, that I don't have time for spirituality, or spirituality is irrelevant to reality, or it is not possible to be able to experience, this sense of spirituality, in day-to-day moments. I mean, there's so much under that category of keeping things completely separate, which also comes into the same aspect of our ideas are so fixed in terms of what is considered to be success, what is considered to be progress, and they're all basically, again, based on what is visible. And I would say that all of us actually do understand on a deeper level that it's not true, right? How many times we've all been challenged by that as well as ourselves, constantly at a crossroads of, have I made progress? It may not even necessarily be in terms of spirituality, but just in day-to-day life, you can probably imagine, not imagine, but recall times when we just compare ourselves to others about all sorts of things. So we have all sorts of ideas of what is considered valuable, what is considered success. And so when it comes to this, so taking it now, just bringing things back into more of perhaps a more relevant level for yourself, that's, there's a phrase in English, it's probably a pretty famous quote, don't judge a book by its cover. I'm not sure many have heard of that. And I find that so interesting because, that's a very common one that everyone knows, but I'm not sure how many are actually successful actually following that. And yet at the same time, I would say that we annoy ourselves that we can't, right? And it can be quite subtle, right? It's actually not very, very, I would say, necessarily very visible. And probably a few years before I actually came into this study, I remember while I was driving the car and I was having this reflection. This has happened more than once. I'm having this reflection and I'm like, I want to just learn something at this moment. And I remember at one point in time, I'm driving, at an intersection. And it's at the intersection, the light turned green, and there was, a car in the opposite direction who had their turning lights on. So they were to turn left and I'm to go straight. And I remember when the light turned green, that thought that crossed my mind was like, I hope they don't expect to turn because it's my right of way, right? And then when I looked closer and I noticed who was driving the car, I was like, oh, it's my dad. Oh no, he can totally take a turn, right? And I remember that moment, I wasn't in the study. I was like, that is so superficial. I was really feeling that inside, and I was really feeling, wow, what's kind of goes on in terms of our habits. But at the same time, do we actually have then a very limited perception of ourselves based on these habits, our reactions? Right? Because that's also not very helpful as well. So this journey actually of experiencing myself to be a spiritual being helps me to realize where I come from, my journey. Why am I the way I am now? And what am I looking for that I'm thirsting for, especially for someone who is searching and they're seeking and they don't seem like they're finding, or they keep seeking, or that they are challenged, that they want to go deeper into what a spiritual journey looks like. And they're challenged by perhaps pressures, I would say, inside that might be informed from the outside, but are now inside in terms of what really matters, where are my priorities. Does that mean I have to, if I want to be able to go deeper into this experience and understanding of myself, that's more than a position, more than possession, more than the expectations that I may have of myself or others may have of me? And do I question that? That's a big challenge as well. But what the beautiful thing about this study of Raj Yoga is that you are learning to experience the real you, but you're also given knowledge to be able to have context of understanding of why there are these reactions inside, why are these feelings of pressure inside, instead of actually looking at yourself like you're a perfect being now. And that is another, reputation that has emerged in spirituality, is that we see ourselves as if we should be perfect. And sometimes when someone's actually on a spiritual journey, a self-declared spiritual journey, they can even be more critical about themselves than they realize, and probably less critical when they weren't. And one of the reasons, if we had more sessions of the meditation one-on-one myth busting, not just about meditation, but spirituality in general, that would be lovely. It will be spirituality 101 myth busting. One of them is that we think that we're perfect. Oh, I'm on the spiritual journey, I should be perfect. And probably everyone expects that I should be perfect. And and that spirituality is about recycling, it's about dressing in white. And there's so many ways in which you can completely be, just deceiving yourself. And again, not because you're trying to, it's just that we have these ideas. And one of them is, yes, I am a soul, I'm a spiritual being, but I am not perfect right now. There is, though, a memory that when we hear spirituality, that it's a very high destination, but we're mixing things up, that we as souls, spiritual beings, we've actually been on a journey and we've completely lost ourselves. Now we're at a state where we have developed habits that have nothing to do with honoring the real us. And so having that context is so helpful, because as you continue to feel the real you have to be this understanding observer of stuff that's going on inside. Very relevant to the story in terms of being in the world, but not of it, is that that's what the journey is about, that you're starting to actually experience a very defined sense of who you are, which you used to experience. But at the same time, there's all this other stuff that's in there. And maybe some have actually seen that image. And let's see if I can bring it up again. But I'm sure, Pauline, you've seen this image. But let's bring it up. So you're going to see a lot of other images of icebergs, but it's a very lovely image. So you can see here. And what's really significant about this image, and of course, this image is used in so many different contexts of, rhetoric of discourse, but specifically we're talking about spirituality in the sense that when we look at ourselves just as physical beings, so to speak, we actually are completely looking at the surface. We don't even understand ourselves. We judge ourselves as well in terms of our habits, in terms of our reactions. We certainly do the same about others. And no access to anything underneath. And even though we might seem like we have access to that, we also don't have a very clear understanding of what's going on underneath the subconscious and why all that stuff is happening. And souls may know of this very, this ongoing constant dialogue in philosophy is, are human beings innately or by nature good or bad or blank slates, right? So these are all this quest of humanity to try to understand themselves in a deeper way. But when we come onto this journey of spirituality, specifically about learning that I am a soul, we also have a lot of these ideas and that are actually quite underneath, these myths that are there that have developed through time. In this journey, we also realize and experience that we have actually taken rebirth. So we've had these previous experiences. And so some of those ideas of spirituality are all underground too. And as we use that example, that we are perfect, right? And we don't necessarily say it that way because we've got lots of critical things going on inside, but we are very critical of ourselves for being critical. And we're also very critical of ourselves for making mistakes. We're critical of ourselves for reacting. But when we actually learn the context of who we are, that's actually not enough, because there's a habit inside of being critical. right? So it's not actually enough just to have, knowledge, so to speak. And we were sharing this morning in the morning's class, knowledge. Why do we use the word knowledge in the study, not truth? The reason why is because you learn in the study about the knowledge of the soul, the journey of the soul, but that's all raw material. You need to actually grind it. You need to reflect on it. You need to use it. You need to be able to apply it with yourself so that you actually gain that maturity of seeing with understanding, true understanding, like your feelings change about yourself and others, your responses change. So, but as mentioned, we also have this acquired personality now of just being critical. It's like we're critical about everything. And if you have a bad day, you just are critical about everything 24/7, right? And you realize it's like, why is that the case? And again, we just judge ourselves. So in this journey, it is the knowledge of being able to see myself as an understanding observer. But I also require that I am feeling the original me, the eternal me. And that's what we often call yoga, the experience. There's knowledge that I need to have to actually start to reflect on things that are much more deeper in terms of how I see myself. But also I need to also feel myself. And that's what yoga means, the experience. And what that does is it allows me then my true character as a soul to emerge, and that capacity to actually feel something different, not just being critical. Because another thing about spirituality that is a myth is really about, it's again not very apparent, is that we kind of just sort of push things away. We kind of run away, we kind of avoid things. And we're right now in this journey of actually experiencing who we are. And all this other stuff is still there underneath, just like this picture is. And so basically, that story that we just heard, it is very much relevant in terms of being able to see yourself, the depth of who you are, not just see the surface, requires that what I'm learning in the study to be something I'm actually using through the day. But to be able to use it, it requires that I keep practicing that awareness, feeling that I am a soul, that I am separate from this body. Because what that really does is it actually helps me to feel I am separate from this altered personality. And it also awakens and strengthens this capacity that I have to actually absorb the knowledge. We're actually we all have that capacity to absorb something at a deeper level. And whatever you have your interest in life, whether it is, for some it's art, for some it's some sort of academia at this point in time, different things, you have the capacity to basically ingest whatever you're learning and to apply it. And so to be able to apply this specifically requires then, of course, first and foremost, that there's that interest, but also the timing, right? Because we have a lot of ideas about ourselves that are actually pretty much that can be quite damaging about ourselves. So that's that element in terms of the story about seeing deeper than what is visible. But this thirst that the king had to be able to feel, that he is of this world, but not in this world, that's the whole quandary that he was inviting the sages and scholars about, is another aspect of spirituality that's also relevant to this as well. This image of the iceberg is that when you practice and experience yourself as a soul and use the knowledge to be able to see things inside and outside without engaging it in the sense that you start to analyze and tear things apart, you start to feel bad about yourself, and then you also start to have lots of interesting ideas about others. We're really good at that. That we actually need to protect this inner capacity, which is what we call the intellect. We call it the third eye, but this capacity that really resonates with the truth of who we are. This capacity to recognize. Every time you practice and experience and realize that you're a soul, you're strengthening this capacity. But every time I start to go off and start to criticize myself, and I start to, go into a dark place or go into a lot of waste, that capacity can sort of get affected. Right? And so taking care of basically my inner world is really supporting me. And it supports me even when it comes to this picture of an iceberg, that there are inner capacities of who you are that are actually re-emerging again. It used to be there. I used to feel it, the experience of who I am. So it's a journey. And to also this capacity of my intellect to not be deceived by that which is on the surface. And so it's fascinating because the journey of actually becoming soul conscious, moving into that reality, is that you're actually at that beginning, you're already feeling I'm in this world and not of this world. And on a deep level, that I'm experiencing the real sense of me, but there's a lot of unrealness inside. There's a lot of doubts, there's a lot of resistance. There might be a lot of outside resistance, but I was speaking to a soul today, was that we allow that outside resistance to affect us. And you just can't tell a soul, just don't be affected by it. It actually takes power. It actually takes you to really even start to take care of your inner world, of how you're thinking, and basically also how you're talking to yourself, how you're even using the knowledge when it comes to someone else, basically giving their experience of their life and what they feel is beneficial. But ultimately for every one of us, I had this huge realization before I came in the study. It was to me a scary realization. And I don't mean it for to sound strong, but I was seeking for a mentor. And I didn't realize for quite a few years, this mentor was pretty unhappy with his own life. And I had asked him to be a mentor to help me in terms of my career. And he wasn't doing anything to me, but because he was so unhappy with his life, he was not happy about being a clinical professor. I was, that he really wished that he went off into medical school and became, basically a clinical provider, because he felt that there was financial stability with that. So he was always veering me towards, becoming a doctor. And then I realized, as lovely as you are, I can't have you as my mentor, because your vision of how you see things is still affected by the past, right? And understandable. But at the time I realized, oh my goodness, nobody in this world knows at all what they're doing. We're all shooting in the dark, and we all are going through trial and error. And then what works for us, we think is going to work for everyone else. And so this is a journey where in this particular study, this knowledge has to be taught by the Supreme Soul, because he's not going through this trauma. He sees things from a place where it's clean. He doesn't have to go through on this journey. We all do. And to be able to go through that journey and start to be able to, as what the king was talking about, was to be in this world, to feel who I really am, and yet also be able to navigate through it with such a maturity and understanding and graciousness, but to do that in a sustainable way. So I'm going to take a pause right now and see if there's anything that anyone wants to share, either on the chat box or if you wish to unmute yourself.
Shanti.
And
I was reflecting about the story, and what resonates with me is going to the very foundation, why I came to this spiritual study. And you mentioned about, what is real, what is deep. And it's very subtle. And I know most of us were that point, before this knowledge that, we keep on seeking on the external. And for my experience, when I came to this knowledge, soul consciousness, I am the seed, is the very key, of how I operate myself in this physical world. And the knowledge needed to be digested, needed to be imbibed. And this really helps me to ground myself and being accepting and being compassionate to myself. And when I remind myself and having that awareness that I am a soul, it was a beautiful experience actually this past few days, because when I remind myself that I am a soul, there's melting that's going on in myself, that it just, there's love, there's confidence in myself, because I am reconnecting with God, which is my father, and that relationship, that I have with him is my only it is my solid eternal company that never fails to judge me. He's holding my hands all the time. And there was this situation for the past, I think, 2 weeks. So I have this feeling that there's 6 souls that kind of really feeling so stressed and, unhappy with their life. So my intention is to bring them to a physical fitness class so they can move, they can stretch. On different occasions, 6 of them I invited, and 6 of them last minute they cancel. And there's some expectation, but again, when you have that awareness, it's easy to shift. You have that acceptance, understanding, for the situation that I don't have any control. And it went really fine for me, and I move on. And then I invited another 2 souls, which committed on me in a very important event. So honestly, there was so much expectation from them that I really expected 101% they will join me in this particular event. And then just yesterday, they cancel. And actually, one soul say that she don't feel it. And then the other soul say like, oh, I'm not going because this friend of mine is not going, so I'm not going. And there was this feeling of, I think sadness and I don't know, something negative. And again, it was easy for me to shift again to that awareness. And there's so much lightness. And I was able to understand the situation that I am a soul. I'm not attached to any relationship, to any commitment. I am just doing my role, and being detached makes you so much liberation in life. And I messaged these 2 souls, and they actually thanked me for being, understanding. It's like, yeah, no worries, it's fine, and we'll connect next time. But it's okay, and thank you for letting me know. So we have the knowledge, we have that awareness, and then we need to put it into action and digesting this knowledge. And our pilgrimage is unique. So sometimes we may, feel good, we may feel bad, but it would be easy, if we have that awareness and having God as our company. So we are able to understand each situation, and that's giving me motivation to move on, to continue with my study and checking in with myself, my aim and, what benefits I get from the study.
Wow, thank you, Pauline, for sharing. That was
Shanti.
very powerful sharing, and it was very much very, very relevant to today's story, and was also making me think about something I've been reflecting on quite a bit lately. Was am I able to feel develop a sensitivity when something, my spiritual practice, the awareness of being a soul, have I moved into the experience of reality? And even these situations that you were talking about really do actually help you to determine, have I moved into reality? Right? Is because that's really the only time. That's what, we use, like, you can say pop quizzes, right? I know that this word test, especially when it comes to spirituality, this word test is a heavy word for many, thinking that God tests us, and actually he doesn't. These are actually things in the drama based on the law of karma, and that's a huge, big, deep topic in itself. But basically, law of karma is actually, there is an original sense of who you are, and when we perform actions that are honoring that and also dishonor that, it leads to an aftermath. And that's spiritual, basically spiritual. We often call it spiritual action, reaction. We know about that in terms of the law of thermodynamics, in terms of for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. We've heard of that, in terms of physicality. But in terms of these spiritual laws as well, in terms of when we are performing actions that dishonor us, the impact first is felt in our consciousness. But in terms of our journey as spiritual beings, it leaves a mark within ourselves, in our record, our journey, our story, that there is a pull within ourselves to want to rectify that, to want to resolve that. So scenes that happen in the drama are actually opportunities to rectify that, right? And they'll keep coming up until we resolve it, actually. And Raj Yoga is learning to be able to resolve it in a way that's sustainable, which is, to resolve it is basically to actually feel who you really are, and actually to be able to see these things that happen and not actually lose your sense of self-worth. And it was very lovely, your examples that you were sharing, because ultimately soul consciousness is really about being able to feel your worth is separate from circumstances, right? And I was really feeling that today. Like, we use this example about, we're actors in the play, and when you wake up and you realize you're an actor in the play and you're not defined by the actual storyline, it's very clear. It's not like you have to do some deep meditation and you have to go run off to the forest. Our idea of spirituality is actually quite, inaccessible, and makes spirituality feel very impossible and irrelevant. But to feel myself to be a soul to the point where it feels very obvious, that's the concern, is that to move off into that reality of being a soul, and not for it to be something intellectual. We use that example of the actor in the play because when you actually go into that reality, I mean, you ask an actor, they are still, they're playing their part, but they know that's not who they are. So they're in that world, but they're not of that world, right? It's a simple example, but it made me realize today that the intention of knowledge and this awareness that Pauline was mentioning about, being a soul, that needs to keep going deeper. So there's the enlightenment piece, but to feel it is then the power. So the more the intention is that I experience the knowledge. I know Pauline has used the word, I use it. I experience it. I embody that feeling, that reality. So and even try to practice doing that in the most incremental moments of feeling there's a real sense of value of me that is distinct from the physical. So that when scenes and situations come up, you can immediately go into that feeling and that awareness very clear, just like physical fitness, that you are able to basically turn on your physical core in a second. But that's why we actually fluctuate, is we are not able to go into that experience of being a soul, feel that sense of who I am, access the significance of that in a second, unless we actually practice through day-to-day moments. It's kind of like telling someone, if they don't practice doing the fire drill in a building and all of a sudden there's a fire, and then they're practicing at the moment when there's a fire, it's not the greatest time to do that, right? So thank you for that lovely example. And so perhaps we can have a little reflection, unless there's anything else. You good? Everyone's good? Everyone's good on YouTube? That drawn line in my memory, that there is a distinction between my identity and this body, its condition, and those that I know around me, or maybe not know, situations, any positions I hold through the day, any roles, anything I identify that I believe to be mine. Deep in our memory, there is this drawn line of distinction between me and everything else. We may not be able to access that memory, but what it looks like is that there is a thirst to not be affected by things, to not be dependent on things, to want to be stable, to feel peace in any given situation, to feel ease and lightness in every given situation. That's what it looks like for every being. And to be aware that I am that soul. I've always been a soul. I forgot that awareness, I forgot that experience. Feel that I am this being looking through these eyes. I'm a being of consciousness. Separate from this body. That my nature can't be seen, but my nature can be felt by me. A nature that is light, that is gentle, gentle stillness. Feel I am not defined by anything of the physical. It helps me feel light, to be aware I am a soul. And to feel that quality of me. I, the soul, I am living peace. And that there is this body that surrounds me. The body doesn't think, it's me, the soul, who thinks. The body isn't aware, it's me, the soul, who's aware. I think and I am aware whilst feeling my experience of me. Both are important, awareness and experiencing that awareness, embodying that awareness. Feeling clearly that I, the soul, am distinct from the physical. That every drop of just feeling that quality of me and feeling the contrast between me and everything temporary, I become stronger in an invisible way. I become freer from all that is temporary, all that changes. Om Shanti. Thank you for joining with us.
Shanti.